It is time for my updated running backs tier list for fantasy football in 2024. It's my top 24 guys ranked in order in this tier list. And let me tell you, this is much, much different from the one I did in June about a month ago. A lot of guys moved up, a lot of guys moved down, and I'm excited to let you guys know all about it. First up, S tier, Christian McCaffrey, no doubt about it. He's the only running back in the NFL with the full workhorse skill set that does everything to the highest degree. We know he's probably the best receiving back in the NFL, but he also had the most red zone touches overall, the second most 10-yard line touches, and the fourth most from inside the 5. He's going to be favored to score a touchdown, if not 2, every single game. I could expect him to get 20 again this year. My running back 2 and first up in A tier is Breece Hall of the New York Jets. The biggest deciding factor for a good running back in fantasy football is the offensive situation that you're in, if you have a good O-line, but most importantly, if your team scores a lot. Obviously, we saw this last year with the Miami backfield, the Detroit backfield, CMC on the 49ers. If your team scores, you're going to get a lot of touchdowns. And you could argue he has by far the biggest change of scenery from last year to this year in the entire NFL. Aaron Rodgers at quarterback versus whoever the hell they were trying to start last year is such a massive, insane difference. They could score like 20 more touchdowns and I wouldn't be surprised. He also showed he's a great receiving back, catching 76 balls last year. A lot of those were kind of cheap dump-offs at the end of the season. I don't think he gets that many this year, but Rodgers is not scared to throw to Aaron Jones, A.J. Dillon, those types of running backs. So I could see another 70 plus, but not quite like those 12 target games that he had at the end of the year. Not to mention his rookie year, he was averaging over 6 yards a carry before he got hurt. Last year, coming off the ACL, we all know that players in their first year back from ACL tears just aren't the same. He didn't look great at the beginning, but at the end, he really pulled it together. I think there's a real argument for him being the most talented running back in the NFL. The other guy that has a good chance at that argument soon is the second guy in A tier, Bijan Robinson. Talking about change of scenery, he's getting a massive one. Arthur Smith did not exactly use him correctly. While Arthur Smith is great in designing run schemes with Derrick Henry, and even when he used Tyler Algier last year, it was good. The problem was he just didn't want to give Bijan 20 plus touches a game, which is maybe fine in real life, but in fantasy, we need that. Now with Kirk Cousins coming in instead of Desmond Ridder or whoever else they tried to play last year, it's going to be a big difference. In the beginning portion of the season, he was catching like 4 to 5 balls a game, really great in the receiving game, but that kind of died down as the season went on. I hope that comes back to start this year, and I kind of think it will. If he's able to dominate the goal line role and get that pass catching role, he could make a push for CMC's S tier rank. My RB4 in the first and B tier, it's going to keep flip-flopping. I changed it from last time around. It's Jonathan Taylor now. I've been lower on him than most in years past just because he doesn't have that receiving skill set for the true S-tier upside running backs, but I think he has a very good shot this year to average over 5 yards a carry. He's finally going to be fully healthy going into a season, or not talking about contracts like he was last year. That's why he missed the first 4 games. He's finally good to go. And with Anthony Richardson comes good things and bad things. The offense is going to be very run heavy. Maybe they even score more, but AR is not going to pass on the ball very much, and he may QB sneak a lot on the goal line. So while I think he's just as good of a running back as Breece Hall or Bijan Robinson, those 2 key factors are the reason that he's going to stay down here, and that's why in B tier, the number 5 running back is Saquon Barkley in such a similar situation. These rushing quarterbacks like Jalen Hurts and Anthony Richardson, obviously they take away stuff with the tush push and goal line work, but they just don't check down to running backs, and receiving work is so important unless you're playing in an archaic standard league. Now between these 2 guys, I think the Eagles offense will be a little bit better than the Colts offense, so that's why originally I had Saquon over him, but Saquon is older, and even though I love him and he's such a talented player, he hasn't been quite as efficient as even I'd like to see from him. I know it's the Giants situation, which is pretty horrible, but I'd like to see a little bit better. But going from the worst O-line in the league to the best O-line in the league is going to be a huge difference. I just am a little bit more worried about what Jalen Hurts is going to take away at the goal line than I am with Richardson, so that's why I went JT over him for now. Third in B tier is going to be Jahmyr Gibbs, another guy who doesn't quite have the full workload. He's going to be good in the receiving game. He had the 7th most targets out of any running back last year, and the goal line work will be here sporadically, but I don't think he'll ever really score a touchdown in a game that David Montgomery also scores a touchdown in. Basically what I mean by that is that Montgomery is going to get the goal line work first, and as the game goes on and they score a lot of touchdowns, then Gibbs will get his fair share. But there's really not a good reason to stop giving David Montgomery a lot of the short yardage work. They want to keep Gibbs healthy, especially for the playoffs. He kind of died down a lot during the end of last year. The part we really remember from Gibbs last year was that 3-week stretch when Montgomery got hurt and Gibbs had the entire workload and went nuts for like 26 points 3 weeks in a row. But I'm not going into this year expecting Montgomery to just get hurt. If anything, Gibbs is the lighter back who's more likely to get hurt. We see a 50-50 split where most of the goal line work and the more boring touches go to Montgomery and all the fun, explosive touches and pass catching work goes to Gibbs. But if at any point in the season Montgomery does go down, Gibbs probably vaults into A tier and maybe makes a push at CMC's S tier, but we'll have to wait and see. I just think as long as both running backs are in that backfield, I project Saquon and Taylor for a little bit more points per game. Starting C tier, our RB7 is going to be Derrick Henry. He's going from a bottom 5 O-line in the Titans to a top 5 O-line in Baltimore, and Baltimore scored over 10 points per game more than Tennessee did last year. Lamar Jackson and his run-pass option ability is going to make this offense very efficient, especially for Derrick Henry, who could see over 5 yards a carry. Gus Edwards had 19 attempts from inside the 5-yard line. He scored 12 of those for touchdowns. That led the league. The Ravens also led the entire NFL in 31.6 run plays per game. Derrick Henry is going to get the entire workload. And Keaton Mitchell is still coming off that devastating ACL tear. I'm not sure he's going to be ready before playoff time. Next up in C tier are RB8, Kyron Williams. Since the first time I did this video, I've moved him up from where I had him. I was a little too harsh on him, I won't lie. Blake Corum is a good signing that they picked up in the draft, and he's going to get, 30%, 25% of the workload. But Kyron was legitimately amazing last year, and he has room to lose points and still be one of the best running backs in the league. He's in a great offense, and if he does maintain that goal line role, he's going to score 10 plus touchdowns with ease. But he had a couple insane receiving games last year at the beginning of the year where he caught like 9 balls. That's not happening again. We saw as the year went on, his pass catching role kept getting smaller and smaller and smaller, although he was still playing like 90% of the snaps. Matt Stafford just wasn't checking down to him. Since Blake Corum is basically an exact clone of him and is going to give him relief when he's tired, I think he goes from like 21 points per game to like 16 or 17 and still does pretty well. Then our third running back in C tier, our RB9, Devon Achane. Probably the most fun player to watch in the NFL last year. He was incredibly efficient, over 8 yards a carry. That's where I'm a little held up. I don't think he's going to be that efficient again. He's in a great offense. He's still going to be very efficient for running back terms, but I don't think he has the goal line work. I think that's Raheem Mostert's role. He should have increased passing down volume. We know he's an extremely brittle, small running back who's not going to be able to handle the full workload, but if you use him in space at the right moments, he'll be electric. I could see something like 11 to 14 touches a game, which means some weeks he'll have like 15 points, others he'll have like 35, and you'll be like, oh my god, this is the best running back in the league. But there is, of course, that baked-in injury risk. I don't like to predict injuries, but he is like the smallest running back we've really ever seen be this successful, and I see limited touchdown upside with Mostert being there. Our RB10 in C tier is Isaiah Pacheco, and he moved up a lot for me. I had him like 2 tiers lower last time we did this. I've changed my mind completely. Last year, Pacheco averaged 15.3 points per game, which in my opinion this year is probably his like lower median outcome. I think he's going to do a little bit better because of this. Last year with McKinnon there, it took him until week 12 to finally play 70+% of snaps. And in his final 8 games, 7 of them he played over 70%. Over that time period, he started averaging 4 receptions a game plus some receiving yards. That's basically an extra touchdown each week. Now Jerick McKinnon is gone, and Marquise Brown and Xavier Worthy are here to stretch out defenses and lighten the box. Patrick Mahomes had an average depth of target last year of 6.5 yards. That was 33rd in the league. Earlier in his career, he used to be above 9. So I think he's going to go back to pushing the ball downfield, which, like I said, is going to make Pacheco have a much easier, more efficient time as a running back. He also only had 9 goal line opportunities last year. Now, that is a kind of a Kansas City thing where he's not going to get too much work because Mahomes loves to throw there, but I can really only see that going up. And on top of that, the Chiefs offense this year has an implied total of 27.5 points per game. Last year, it was 21.5, a full touchdown more. That's insane. The final running back in C tier and my RB11 is Travis Etienne on Jacksonville. Now, last year, it's no doubt about it, he ran very hot on touchdowns, especially during the middle of the season. He was like a top 3 RB for most of the year. But when he wasn't scoring touchdowns, he wasn't really catching enough passes to sustain that points per game, which is what I'm worried about again this year. He came into the league as this profound pass catcher in college, but it turns out that was mostly due to his system. He's not really that great in space. That's not really fair. He's good in space when the ball's in his hands, but actually getting there, his route running is not that refined. He should see 70% of touches again. I just think he's a little bit better than the tier below him. I almost put him in there, but I'm just going to give him the benefit of the doubt last year with all those touchdowns that maybe he does it again. Speaking of that tier, my RB12 in row D is Josh Jacobs. He only averaged 13.9 points per game last year. Obviously, that's horrible considering the year before he was a beast. But the Raiders and running backs don't really get along when the situation's that bad. On the other hand, the Packers, that's a pretty great situation now. The only real concern is that Matt LaFleur keeps saying he's going to use a running back by committee approach. I'm not sure how much I buy that, because if they were going to do that, they should have just kept Aaron Jones, who's a much better running back. So I think with taking a guy like Jacobs, they do want to put more of the workload on his shoulders. They were sick of Aaron Jones getting hurt, and they expect him to be more healthy. So I could really see him going from 14 points per game to 15 or 16 just by the offense being that much better. We know he can catch passes when he's asked to. He's not great at it, but he can do it. But he's an absolute bowling ball in front of the goal line. If they just stop giving A.J. Dillon the work on the goal line, Josh Jacobs could go insane. My RB13 in row D is Joe Mixon, kind of in a similar situation. There's going to be a lot of these running backs that maybe aren't that talented, but they're on great teams. This is another year where I don't think Joe Mixon is going to be efficient at all. The run scheme should fit him pretty well, though, and he's going to score a lot of touchdowns. Pretty simple. He's on a great team with C.J. Stroud as his quarterback and amazing three wide receivers. I mean, he's not going to get an insane amount of volume because I think this team should be pretty pass-heavy, but, 16 to 18 touches per game on a team that's going to see a lot of goal line opportunities, I don't mind it. We know he's not the best pass catcher, but just like Jacobs, he can do it. He usually gets subbed out on third downs. At least that's what happened in Cincinnati. Maybe that happens here, but Dameon Pierce is not a good pass catcher, so I don't see him taking any work away. Next up, my RB14 in D tier, it's Aaron Jones on the Minnesota Vikings. Even though he's older and more injury prone than the last two guys, I think he's by far more talented. We saw over the last 5 games of last year, including the playoffs, he went absolutely berserk, going over 100 yards in every single game. He had 3 touchdowns versus the Cowboys. The dude is just electric. Now, a lot of this depends, like I said before, on how good the offense is for a running back. Is he going to be able to score a lot of touchdowns? I do think he'll have most of the goal line work. Ty Chandler's not really that guy. We're not sure yet if it's J.J. McCarthy or Sam Darnold. It's looking like it's leaning towards Sam Darnold, but the offense may be not that great. I think it'll start slow and get better as the year goes on. And Jones has enough pass catching upside to keep himself fantasy relevant for all those weeks that he's not scoring touchdowns. But if the Vikings do happen to have a good offense all of a sudden, man, he's in store for a huge breakout season. Then we get to my RB15. It's James Conner, still in D tier here. He was absolutely insane over the last 5 games with Kyler Murray last year. His PPR points over those 5 games were 22.5, 17.9, 22.2, 26.3, and 30.4. And he was actually very efficient when Kyler was in the offense. Even the whole year, he averaged over 5 yards a carry, and he was top 7 in breakaway run rate, which measures the amount of the time that you run for over 15 yards. On top of that, he was the 8th best running back in terms of broken or evaded tackles. And now the offense gets a whole lot better. He gets a full year of Kyler. Pretty much every time Kyler's on the field for the last 3 years, he's been amazing. Then we get Marvin Harrison and the breakout of Trey McBride. It was just 2 years ago and he had 18 touchdowns. I realistically could see something similar. Don't be surprised if he does lead the league in touchdowns. Then we get to my RB16, still in row D. It's the guy I talk about the most, my favorite value running back this year. It's Raheem Mostert. He scored 21 touchdowns and had 53 red zone touches. Excluding his injured games, he was averaging over 18 points per game. That was the RB3 last year behind Kyron and CMC. He was the 7th best running back in terms of broken or evaded tackles and the 4th best in breakaway run rate. He's a much bigger back than A-Chain. He's not going to lose that goal line work, but he's not going to have any receiving upside. But if A-Chain does happen to get hurt, we have some real 20 point per game upside. And last year he was running against boxes that on average had 6.5 defenders. This was 57th in the league, which means it's very easy for him to be efficient. And the reason for this is because Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill keep defenses honest and make a lot of cornerbacks play. Still in D tier, my RB17 is going to be Najee Harris on the Pittsburgh Steelers. I don't think Arthur Smith is bad. I actually think he's great for running backs. He was amazing with the Titans and Derrick Henry in 2020 and 2021. Obviously with the Falcons, he didn't use Bijan as much as we wanted, but he was still great with the running backs. Apparently Harris lost some weight this year, so he's going to be more explosive, which I love to see. Since Jalen Warren has broken out a little bit though, I don't think Najee's going to have much receiving upside, maybe like 2.5 catches a game, but his goal line work is definitely going to be there. And for an offense that really doesn't have much going on in the pass game, he should get used all the time in the goal line work. Then finally rounding out D tier, my RB18, Rachaad White. I think he's vastly overrated as a real life running back. Last year he just got all the touches because they had no other option to turn to, but the Tampa Bay Bucks did just draft Bucky Irving. I already made a complete video on this, but all his advanced metrics were absolutely terrible last year, and coaches do look into that these days. I think they're going to split up his work a little bit more. Not to mention that's not a good run blocking O-line. It's not a great situation to want to be in. The only reason we liked him is because he played almost 100% of snaps. I almost wanted to put him in E tier. The only reason I'm not is just in case I am wrong and he does still play like 80 to 90%. That slim chance of that happening, he'll still get a big workload. Then we get to E tier with my RB19, Alvin Kamara. I'm not going to lie, the age is starting to show. He is not the efficient running back he used to be, and this O-line is like 31st or 32nd in the league. It's bad. But my God, does Derek Carr love to check the ball down. Last year, this dude had some games of like 7+ receptions that I don't know how happened, but they just keep happening. He even had 2 games of 14 targets. One had 13 catches, the other had 12. But at this point, that is all he's living off of: targets, catches. He has no rushing upside and no goal line upside. It's a bad O-line. The offense is going to be bad. He just got to catch passes in PPR to get some points. Next up, my RB20 still in E tier is David Montgomery. He's going to get the goal line work. I already kind of explained this with Gibbs. He could even move up to D tier, especially if anything were to happen to Gibbs. He'd actually probably vault into like C tier. This dude would be a top 10 running back every single week. He has shown he's able to catch passes in Chicago and deal with a full workload. He always seems to stay healthy. And on a team that wants to run the ball behind the best offensive line in the league, you could easily see like 12 to 13 touchdowns. Next up is my RB21, still in E tier, James Cook. I think people have a better perception of Cook than he actually played last year. He averaged about 14 points per game. That was basically because in Kansas City and Dallas, he averaged 30 points. But besides that, he didn't have a single game over 20 points last season. His breakaway percentage and evaded and broken tackles were all very bad, and his run blocking was the second best in the league. But when you look at his yards created per touch, which basically eliminates what your O-line blocks for you, he was terrible. He was like 43rd. Then we add on top of it, they draft a running back who's just an absolute bulldozer who they're going to use in short yardage situations like the goal line, and Josh Allen had 15 rushing touchdowns last year. He's also going to be used on the goal line. Cook really didn't do enough in the receiving game to make me think that that's going to grow a ton, but that's really the only way that he gets out of E tier is if that receiving work does grow. Then my RB22, Kenneth Walker, the final back in E tier. His role is going to get a little weird. Brian Grubb joining Seattle is going to run a very spread out offense that wants to throw the ball a ton, so if Kenneth can catch passes, that's good, but he has never done that even in college. Zach Charbonnet has always been the better pass blocker and pass catcher, so I'm a little worried about this. Walker would have to be really efficient in front of the goal line and on the ground, and this offense overall would have to pick it up a lot compared to last year, which I think it will, but I would estimate he gets about 14 carries a game, and he has to get like 2 to 3 to 4 goal line carries a game. But I would probably estimate him getting like 14 carries a game, maybe a catch or two here and there. Overall, not really the running back workload we want to see. Finally, we get to F tier where I have two more running backs. RB23, Zach Moss on the Cincinnati Bengals. I'm not going to lie, dude proved he could play really well last year. On the Colts, when Jonathan Taylor was out, he was amazing. And even when Jonathan Taylor came back for some weeks, he was still very good. Chase Brown is more of a scat back. He did some okay things in the pass game last year. He's very fast, quick little guy. But Zach Moss is going to take most of the workload, especially on the goal line. And we've seen in situations like Joe Mixon, he can still catch a lot of passes on first and second down. Joe Burrow's not afraid to check down to his running backs. And now that Joe Burrow's healthy, the offense should be much better and score a lot more points, so he could see a lot of touchdowns. And then finally, my RB24 to round out the F tier, Jaylen Warren. He has a lot of contingent upside if anything does happen to Najee Harris, and he did carve out a substantial receiving workload. There's a serious argument that he might be more talented than Harris. I think coaches are still going to want to lean on Harris more though, but he's in a great spot where he still has standalone value for you every single week, and if something did happen to Najee, he's a pretty much top 12 running back. Next up, I'm going to do my wide receivers tier list, so if you want to see that, drop a like on this video, leave a comment what other videos you want me to do, drop a follow, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.